I'm Sayla Burley, and I am graduating with a degree in interdisciplinary studies with a focus in screenwriting and film critical studies. And really, my focus is in representation in media, specifically diabetes in film. And in this vlog, I'll be talking about Still Magnolias. When one thinks of Still Magnolias, at least I think of that critical line, "Don't talk about me like I'm not here." This is really an outcry on a lot of diabetics in film. I mean, considering look at what we've been represented in film so far. Tragic death sequences, getting kidney disease, not being able to lift our own children, and this kind of removal of autonomy. Shelby is not in control of her own destiny. How does this impact diabetics today? In the 1980s Southern drama Still Magnolias, you probably think of that one scene. You know the one. They're in the hair salon, getting ready for Shelby's wedding. Dolly Parton has all these beautiful curls. We're canvassing the room with beauty products, very 80s. And then something changes. We start zooming in on Shelby. She seems out of it, to say the least. Is it panic? Maybe premarital jitters? Hard to know, but the women seem prepared for this. And we hear their dialogue kind of crossing over itself with an eerie tone in the background, and something seems very wrong. However, they start gathering supplies, getting juice out of the fridge, getting candies out of a purse. They know the script, they know what they need to do. And Em Lynn kind of encourages this, with one of the women grabbing juice, and Em Lynn saying, "Juice is better," which makes sense. Simple carbohydrates would be the best if Shelby's experiencing a low blood sugar. But it seems more like a panic attack, if anything, at this moment. And there's even dialogue like she has too much insulin in her system to explain that she's diabetic. But I don't think this is the most accurate containment of what's going on, because it might be that she's running around, it's her wedding day, it's a high stress situation. But through all of this, she kind of seems different from her usual self. Like there's a difference from her kinder, more gentle, natural self to this more rageful, alternate version of herself. And for this reason, even Em Lynn, her own mother, seems devoid of empathy, which is really interesting. Then almost she returns to her body in a way when she gets that juice in her system and becomes her more gentle self again, kind of like she was overtaken by some kind of monster. Now, when I'm low, it usually feels like shaky, kind of nervous, my head kind of feels like it's floaty, but I'm not usually rageful or, snapping at people for no specific reason. This kind of falls under the myth of diabetic rage, which is what I just said, a myth. Yes, diabetes comes with a myriad of ups and downs, and like any human, you're going to deal with mental health issues, like maybe you'll be a little depressed in a moment or anxious in a moment, but it doesn't mean you become an entirely different person just because your blood sugar is a little low. And one thing that I did notice that's missing from the scene is one of these. Now this, if you're not acquainted, is a glucose monitor. And that is how we usually tell whether our blood sugar is high or low. And the fact that it was missing is kind of significant, considering we don't know whether this episode is caused by high or low blood sugar. Sometimes I have rageful moments, not diabetic rage, mind you, and my blood sugar is just a little too high, and I just need to drink some water and take some more insulin. But instead, that's not even a consideration. Instead, she's just slow. She's got to have juice. If her blood sugar was high, though, that would be not the most responsible decision. According to Cinema of Control by Kevin Ferguson, we can really dissect this kind of dichotomy of Shelby's personality. They kind of show diabetes as a creation of monster of sorts. Of this kind of a split personality of Shelby, from this like gentle, kind nature to this more high-strung, almost angry person. And it also shows this over-reliance on the kindness of others that's common in diabetic movies. I mean, she is fully reliant on the other women to get her diabetic supplies, when usually when I'm in this situation, I have my own stuff in my purse. I'm not really looking for anyone else to be carrying juice, let alone fruit snacks, or any of the things I typically use. And it also doesn't show an accurate representation of diabetic reproductive rights in a lot of ways, considering most diabetic women have perfectly normal, healthy pregnancies. So this sued a lot of misinformation. There's also more focus on the dramatic events instead of the facts around the actual real person that Shelby was inspired by, whether her brother intended it or not. And overall, Shelby tends to choose pleasure over her life, and this is seen as morally culpable. According to the narratives of diabetes in film, seeking pleasure, God forbid, is definitely not what you need to be doing. Which kind of shows that, like, cinema of excess and, like, choosing excess food, excess pleasure as being, like, a negative, and that diabetic character, that diabetic theme being kind of like a punishment of sorts. If we look at Shelby and her mother as a narrative function, it makes sense. It fits into the narrative of Demeter and Persephone, sending Persephone off to the underworld. And you kind of have that vibe in the beginning when Emlyn is preparing her daughter for her wedding day. She's sending her off to get married, and this is definitely an impactful decision. I mean, considering if she gets pregnant, she'll die. This is thematically brought up in the first couple of minutes in this moment. And this kind of falls into the Hades going into the underworld, because if she gets pregnant, she will go to the underworld. And Lynn makes these small sacrifices, such as giving her kidney to her child, to try to bring her back from that. So from a narrative standpoint, this kind of mortality conversation makes sense. So you might be asking yourself, that's a film from the 1980s. What impact does that have on me today? We're looking at a recent study, as recent as 2024, Justin Maeda interviewed various diabetics in a qualitative study, and he was concerned about reproductive rights, whether these diabetics felt that they should reproduce, and what things were hindering from making that decision. A lot of them cited physician support was a major concern, whether their A1C was in range or A1C was out of range would kind of impact the decision in terms of how their physician would go about the issue. A lot of people cited also financial difficulties. They didn't want to have to choose between, buying their insulin or taking care of their children, giving them food and things like that. But surprisingly, a lot of people cited Steel Magnolias as being a reason why they didn't want to reproduce. Thinking about Shelby's difficulties and just that penultimate scene where she passes out, leaving her toddler alone in the house. Horrific for any parent, and specifically when you're diabetic, because it really hits close to home. And kind of that moral responsibility of whether you should reproduce if that is something that could happen to you. That is a primary concern, the child's safety, your own safety. Even male diabetics cited that as being a concern, considering they were worried about if they had complications being able to lift their child, citing scenes where Shelby was lifting her child after the kidney transplant. But overall, this piece of representation is detrimental because it continues that story that it is morally culpable to have a child, or that this is somehow something that is pleasurable that we should not pursue because it would make us morally culpable and is a circumstance and consequence of our disease that we can't control and would have negative impacts on another person's life. When in actuality, a lot of people live perfectly natural, healthy lives with their own children. In this next vlog, I'll be talking about Memento. Now you might be asking yourself, Memento? Is there diabetes in Memento? Well, if you remember Sammy Jenkins, and I hope you do, we had enough times of Lenny telling us to remember him. Specifically remember Sammy Jenkins' wife, or Lenny's wife. I don't know, it's a little confusing, we'll talk about it. Then you would know that she's diabetic, and that is a primary part of the story. Now looking at Sammy Jenkins' wife, I think it's memorable to note, she's not even named, she's just considered his wife. And I think this lack of autonomy continues from Shelby into this next character. So look forward to it. I'll see you next time.